All right, it is 1:01 and it is time to begin. So welcome everyone to our next installment of the Science Solutions series here at Rookery Bay. I'm Sarah Falkowski. I'm the Education Coordinator at Rookery Bay Research Reserve in Naples, Florida. And I have this wonderful panel to share with you today. So first, I want to just thank you for coming. And then I want to turn it over to our Coastal Training Programs Coordinator, Jessica McIntosh, for some housekeeping items.
Great, thanks, Sarah. Hi, everybody. Glad to see some familiar names back in the attendee list and some new people as well today. Before we get started, in case you're not familiar with the Zoom webinar platform, I'm going to give you a couple of tips on how to interact with us during the webinar. So the first one is that we are using the Q&A, the question answer function. So you'll see down at the bottom toolbar, you've got a little box that says Q&A with some chat boxes. That's where we would like for you guys to post questions. We will have 3 different presentations today, and we'll have about 10 minutes at the end of the webinar for the panel to address any questions that you have about the material presented. So please put questions into that Q&A box throughout the presentations and towards the end, so that we'll have some interesting questions for our panelists. And also go in there and see what other people are posting, because the tip number 2 is going to be to upvote, or you do a little thumbs up by the questions that you want to hear answered. That's going to help us to prioritize and make sure that we are addressing the kind of most interesting questions for you guys during our discussion section at the end. And at the end as well, I just want you to know there's a little raise hand function. You'll see the hand, and we do have the ability to unmute you if you ask a question and maybe you want to give some more detail on it. So if we ask you to use that, you just hit that little raise hand button and we'll be able to give you permission to talk directly to the panelist. The last tip is something throughout all webinars I always say, is to avoid distractions. We're here for a short amount of time. We have a lot of great information and different perspectives to bring to you today. So I do recommend that you turn away from your email, your phone, and other distractions for the next hour that we'll be together. And thanks, Sarah. I'll turn it back to you.
All right, great. Thank you, Jessica, and thank you for everyone who's joining. I'm going to go ahead and introduce our first speaker. So our very first speaker of 3 today is Adam DiNuovo, and he represents Audubon, Florida. He is the Shorebird Monitoring and Stewardship Program Manager for Audubon, Florida. So he's going to speak for the first portion, and then we're going to transfer to 2 more speakers before those question and answers. All right, Adam, it's all you.
All right, thank you very much. Thanks everybody for joining us. I'm going to be talking a little bit today, and then my portion of this talk is about second chance and kind of how it came to be what it is today, which is a very important and protected seabird and shorebird nesting site down here in Southwest Florida. As you can see on this map, really what makes second chance so important for the birds is that it's a shoal off the shore of Cape Romano where the dome homes are. You can see in the upper left of the screen, that's kind of a portion of Cape Romano. The dome homes would be off that point right there. And then that little sandbar with all the different colored shapes on it is actually second chance. Those shapes, or those colored outlines, kind of show how the sandbar shifts over time. And what makes these things, or these places, so important to these nesting birds is the fact that they're so dynamic. They're constantly changing and moving. The action of the waves and the weather limits vegetation and makes it very conducive to nesting seabirds. So all of these things make this a really important and attractive place for seabirds. So this is also second chance. This is a better view of it, kind of an eye-level view of second chance. As you can see, it's very flat, not much vegetation. You can see some vegetation off in the distance there. This is the absolute ideal habitat for many species of nesting seabirds like terns and black skimmers, which are the birds that we have there at second chance. Also Wilson's plovers. They like that little bit of vegetation you can see off in the distance. That's where they would land. So by looking at this, and when I came to Florida in 2015, this is what I saw when I first went there, and I recognized it right away as a place that would be very, very important for birds. It's away from the mainland. It's open, it's flat, it's sandy. You don't deal with mammal predators there because it's so far from the mainland. It just makes it perfect. What I also saw when I came to Florida in 2015 was this. This is also second chance. There was a lot of disturbance there, a lot of boats. It's understandable. It was a very attractive place for shellers and people that wanted to get away from the mainland, sort of have this remote experience on an island and not, not be your traditional beach, your beach adventure. So this was obviously a problem. These birds were very close to this disturbance. So when these people were present and birds were trying to nest, there was a little conflict there where the birds weren't able to do what they needed to do in order to nest successfully. So what happened was Rookery Bay for years and years and years had been monitoring this, and recently, or the several years leading up to the CWA formation, Beverly Anderson, who you can see there in the middle, she worked for Rookery Bay Research Reserve, and she was out there monitoring these birds year after year and documenting not only the nesting, but the disturbance. And it was really important that Beverly did this. These long-term data sets that we have are so important for bird protection. Year after year, she watched this island do poorly. No real chicks fledged here. There was lots of human disturbance. She documented all of it. She even went above and beyond what we would normally do and really had detailed spreadsheets of the disturbance, which were really, really important to show the impacts that this disturbance was having on second chance. So here, this is just a snapshot of what Beverly was seeing while she was monitoring. Sorry about that. Can someone back up a few slides? Yeah, right there, that's fine. I somehow lost control of the screen. This just shows the flushing event. So this would be an event that was witnessed while Beverly and her crew was monitoring the island. And you can see leading up to 2014, where we had 79% of the visits, the colony was flushed by by a dog or by people that were walking on the island. And every time this happens, those nests are exposed to the elements. The birds are not sitting, they're not feeding their chicks. And as a result of that, they were producing no chicks. So lots of birds would nest there, but it became sort of an ecological trap. What ended up happening was Rookery Bay, in partnership with Audubon, Florida, and FWC, proposed making this a critical wildlife area, which would increase protection for these birds. Long story short, and you're gonna hear more about this later, that process used the data that was collected at Rookery Bay. Lots of people came together and it got posted as a CWA, which was very important because it kept boats from landing on second chance, which is the key in a place like this, is to reduce that disturbance to nearly zero. And when that happens, usually, and what was proposed was good things were gonna happen for the birds. So I'm happy to report that since I've been here monitoring these birds since 2015, the CWA was established in 2016, and we immediately saw really amazing changes in what was happening out there. This is a Wilson's plover with its chick. We have about 5 pairs out there every season, and all of them produce chicks that become flight capable and leave the island, and they enter the population. So they become breeding birds. Hopefully a couple years after they hatch, they come back and they raise chicks of their own. And year after year since 2016, this has been happening with Wilson's plovers on second chance. Another real success story at second chance is the least terns. This is a bird that's declining. It's state threatened in Florida. It's declining along its entire range on the Atlantic flyway. So any colony that we have that we can produce chicks in is really important. And least terns made an amazing recovery there when they weren't fledging any chicks, or 1 or 2 a season, to every tern pair produces a chick there now, more or less. And black skimmers, this is another bird. When I first came, they weren't really nesting. And then once it was closed and the disturbance was less, black skimmers decided that second chance was a pretty good place to be. So now they're nesting there. They're nesting there in pretty big numbers this year. The numbers off the top of my head, I don't know. But they also are producing more than 1 chick per pair by the looks of it right now. Where before we didn't even have them nesting there because of the disturbance. Now there's another place in Collier County that these birds can nest successfully. So a huge win by getting this island designated a critical wildlife area. And I think for me, to close, I made this graph just to show this stark difference in what this CWA meant to this sandbar. You can see those dark orange bars. That's the number of nests that we had over time, starting in 2011 and going to 2017. You can see at 2015, we had about 60 pairs of birds nesting, and actually we had one chick fledge. So it was like 0.016 chicks per pair, which is really, really terrible. I mean, it took 60 pairs of birds to produce one flight capable chick. Fast forward 1 year, the first year of the CWA, we had about 60 or 70 nests on second chance. Every single one of those pairs produced a flight capable chick. In one season, by making it a CWA, that was the difference. And then you can see 2017, the following year, we had 100 pairs of least terns nests, and each one of them produced a chick. So it went from a chick every 70 pairs to every single pair producing a chick, which is an amazing difference. And it's all credited to this tool that FWC has, which is a designation of a critical wildlife area. And I'm going to turn it over to Brad now, who'll talk more about CWAs and what they actually are.
Okay, great. Thank you so much, Adam. I am happy to introduce our next speaker. So we will next be hearing from Brad Cornell. He is the Southwest Florida Policy Associate for both the Western Everglades, Audubon Western Everglades, and Audubon Florida. Okay, Brad, you have control of the screen. Just unmute your speaker.
Details. All right, thanks, Sarah. Let's see here. Oh, got it. So I'm going to talk a little bit about what a critical wildlife area is and how they're created. But I just want to point out that, there are a number of ways that we protect wildlife and conserve species and habitat. The old-fashioned way, of course, is to just buy it. So we have Florida Forever. I don't know if you saw on the news, the Land and Water Conservation Fund had a bill passed by Congress and just signed by the president to dedicate close to $1 billion every year guaranteed for national wildlife refuges and management. And, so these are really, really important tools. But there is this issue of once you have land that's presumably protected, there are ways that that still can be undermined if we don't manage it well, if we don't enforce the rules that keep these species safe. That's where critical wildlife areas come into play. So since 1992, the state of Florida established a policy in the Florida Administrative Code, 68A 1905, that allows for dedicating and designating areas where wildlife are heavily using that spot, and there is high conflict with people. In other words, what you saw in Adam's slides that Beverly Anderson and Rookery Bay documented over years was that there were all kinds of conflicts with people shelling, boating, dogs, campfires. All these things were keeping the birds from actually being successful in nesting. These are for the nesting season. So the tool that we needed was some way to basically protect and close off that area. And you have to document it, and you have to document the wildlife use as well as the conflict. But once you do, it enables you to use law enforcement to close the area. And that's what critical wildlife areas bring to the table. All right, now I'm trying to advance and it's not advancing. Let's see, let me try that. Okay, there we go. Whoops. So we have in the state 32 currently. Back in 1992, in the first years of the program, they established about 17 critical wildlife areas around the state. And then they didn't do any for over 20 years. And just in the last several years, they added another 15. And I'm going to go through how that happened. But you can see on this map, all the colored little dots are mostly on the coast. So we're talking about wading birds, we're talking about seabirds that nest, migratory species that rest on our beaches, shorebirds. These are mostly coastal places that are very tiny. Even though there are 32, these are little mangrove islands or spots like Sand Dollar, Sand Dollar Island or Second Chance sandbars. These are tiny places that have an outsized importance for wildlife. After 20 years, there was a proposal over in Martin County for Bird Island, which was a spoil island that was heavily used by nesting spoonbills, the roseate spoonbills, and lots of other wading birds. And it was also a favorite fishing spot because where the birds are in the mangroves, they poop into the water and the fish come because there's lots of nutrients. So you have this sort of inherent conflict between fishing and bird rookeries and nesting areas on islands. So this was a proposed critical wildlife area that FWC brought forward in 2014 after over 20 years. Audubon and a whole lot of other folks went to the Florida Wildlife Commission and advocated for it, and it was approved. And that was the opening of the floodgates. Well, not the floodgates yet. So the next year in 2015, Second Chance was proposed, and we heard some of the data that supported that. And the following year in 2016, 13 more were added. And so this was an incredible feat that Audubon and all the conservation groups had supported. This is the actual first page of the proposal that Rookery Bay submitted with the data, the graphs, the pictures of the conflicts to FWC saying, hey, we have the perfect spot that we need to protect better. We manage it, but we can't do it without some law enforcement and without some closure power. And so here it is. This was the start of that process. The process, as Adam pointed out, is heavily dependent on data. You gotta prove that the wildlife are there, and you gotta prove that there are conflicts. Carol Rizkala, Dr. Rizkala is the woman who is on the far left there with the hat. She was in charge of critical wildlife areas. And now we have Michelle Van Deventer with FWC who has taken over for her. They oversee the critical wildlife area program. And these data show that the Second Chance sandbar is used all year round by wading birds and shorebirds and terns mostly, and even white pelicans in the wintertime. These data this graph was provided by Ted Below, who was a colleague of mine, worked at National Audubon out of Corkscrew Swamp. He worked for Rookery Bay. He has a very long set of data, and it's one of the things that Ted had advocated for, along with Beverly Anderson, who worked with him. The two of them gathered all these data and more data that show the trends were bad before we had the designation. I just want to use these data to point out, this was in the PowerPoint slides before the commissioners at the hearing to decide whether to approve Second Chance. And note the gap in the middle of no data. And this is kind of the thing that the birds face. And that is where Second Chance sandbar basically went under the waves. It submerged. And for 6 years, there was no Second Chance sandbar, it was underwater. So the birds couldn't use it, so no data. And then when it came back and reemerged, the birds found it and started using it very heavily, except so did the boaters and the campers and the dogs. And here's the evidence that was put in front of the commission. Hey, we got a problem here. Drinking, campfires, dogs off leash. It was a zoo. One of the features in the process is that the landowner, whoever owns the land, has to give permission. In this case, it was the state of Florida and DEP. And so DEP said, yeah, you can, we agree. This is something that needs to be done. So we give our permission. This is the letter giving that permission. I will note in the process of bringing forward the next, 15 or so, or 13 critical wildlife areas, sometimes it's not very easy to figure out who even owns the land. And so that permission ends up being a little bit of a tough task. But most of the times we've figured that out. This is FWC Commissioner at the time, Lisa Pretty, who's from Collier County. And she was critical to the process of approval of this. She was a very influential commission member, and she was very interested in this. And I and Rookery Bay had lots of conversations with her. She was so interested that she said, will you take me out there and show me this? And so we did. We took her out by boat. This was Keith and me and Adam and Beverly, and we went out to Second Chance. And this is Cape Romano from a further off distance. You can see up here, Marco Island. Here's Second Chance Sandbar. Here's Cape Romano and the dome houses. And so we took her by boat from down by 92, where the boat launch is for Rookery Bay. And she saw it for herself and said, oh my gosh, this is an incredible place. But she, like many others, had some qualms about closing areas that were heavily depended on for recreation. She doesn't, and neither do we. We don't like to close areas that the public enjoy for recreation. So what we did was, well, we showed her how important Second Chance was, and then we took a boat ride all the way up to Marco Island, past Cape Romano, past Morgan Island, and past Kais Island, and showed there are beaches all the way along here. So what we demonstrated in that trip was that there are plenty of alternative places for people in boats and beach recreators to come and enjoy the same sort of fun that they can have on Second Chance. So by closing Second Chance for nesting shorebirds and terns and skimmers, we're not really depriving the public of much opportunity. And she was convinced. This is also part of the process. You got to reach out to the eco tour operators, the shelling boats, the fishermen, and the public in general. They had 2 public meetings in June. Everybody was very supportive for Second Chance Sandbar. And this is true also for all the other proposals. You gathered letters of support from Audubon and others. And I'm showing this picture of Jean Hall, who's a friend and colleague of ours, and also a photographer. And Jean took a particular interest in these critical wildlife areas. And she also happened to send a lot of emails of pictures of Second Chance, which is, she's here on Second Chance taking this picture of Wilson's plovers and least terns and the habitat, as well as the conflicts. And she sent those to the FWC chairman, Brian Yablonsky. Commissioner Yablonsky was very responsive to that. And he asked Jean, well, listen, we've got these 13 other proposals. Would you take pictures of those? And so Jean, on her own dime and her own time, went around the entire state of Florida taking pictures of every single critical wildlife area. This is Flag Island up in the Panhandle. And this is Broken Islands and Pine Island Sound. There were CWA proposals all over the state. Jean, just did yeoman's work taking these beautiful photographs. This is Second Chance with least terns feeding their chicks. Here's some more least tern and a couple of chicks around it. A Wilson's plover. There's a little Wilson's plover baby, and who can say no to that? So when Jean sends pictures like this, mind you, I'm telling you the strategies for policy making, and this is probably the strongest card we have to play in the policymaking suite of tools, is a baby bird in front of the Florida Fish and Wildlife Conservation Commission. When that showed up in front of them, and this one with its baby, the commission said, well, how can we say no? And so they approved every single one of those. They approved Second Chance, they approved all the other new proposals, except for one where they couldn't figure out who owned the land, and that one had to be worked out later out on the East Coast. And it was a huge day for conservation in the state of Florida. This is Commissioner Yablonsky, the chair of the commission at the time, and that's Jean, after the meeting at which they approved all those CWAs. So it was a huge success because of science, because of the data, because Rookery Bay documented what needed to be, and all the other agencies and proposers documented the importance of this and the conflicts. It allowed the state to be able to post closures and protect these very small but very important places. And I have one last thing to point out, which is to say that when you look at the landscape, clearly law enforcement and management and science are vital. But even sometimes at the end of that day, there are challenges that we face. And I will tell you that Audubon had to go to court recently to protect one of the first CWAs called Little Estero Island up on Fort Myers Beach. It was established back in 1992. And so we had to go to court to try and protect that one and keep it safe from development proposals that were right next to it. And so, you know, even if it's an island, no island is an island, so to speak. There's all kinds of threats and influences that we always, you know, whether you're a conservation group or a land management agency like Rookery Bay, you got to remain vigilant. So, so far, it's a success story. We can't control Mother Nature, we can't control hurricanes, but those things that we can control, we need to do what we can. And I think Keith is next.
All right, great. Thank you so much, Brad. That was so informative and very heartfelt. Nothing wrong with having the human aspect in that story with those great animals. And thank you, Jean, for those photos. It's really nice even to see from our home offices. All right, next up, we have our final speaker, and this is Keith Lockinen. He is the director of Rookery Bay National Estuarine Research Reserve here in Naples, Florida. He's responsible for the administration and supervision of the 110-acre reserve, and he works with more than 31 on-site employees involved in research, education, and coastal stewardship. Keith, I'm getting your slide ready. There we go. And you now have control of the screen. Take it away.
I have control. Thank you. Thank you so much, Brad. What I really want to talk about in my part of this is about the management and implementation side. And so much of that is really about partnerships, which I really want to dive into. But the tricky part with a place like Second Chance is it moves around a lot, as previously mentioned. And as a friend of mine, Steve Boutel, once said, the only thing constant on the coast is change. And so if you look at the left side and the right side there, you might think those are two different areas. Well, that's left is post-Irma, right is pre-Irma. And you can see this area shifts around quite a bit. So it presents quite a bit of challenges for actual management. One of the things that really helps us with management is we don't have to worry about where that actual sandbar is every year. The CWA is actually a box, and the closure is actually for the emergent shoal only. Now, the important thing to also note is that the closure is only during nesting season. It's only from April until the birds finish nesting, which can be as late as October. The partnership part here really comes into play here because these are state lands. They're managed by DEP, Rookery Bay National Estuarine Research Reserve, and the FWC has the closure regulations. At another layer, even though we manage the habitat, these are state-listed imperiled species, particularly black skimmers and least terns, that are managed by the Florida Fish and Wildlife Conservation Commission. So it's really management by partnership. And it really does take a village to raise birds. If you see that little bird in the middle, that's FSA, you have to really look at that as the forerunner for how partnerships are formed around the state of Florida. That's the Florida Shorebird Association. Under that umbrella, folks like DEP, FWC, Friends of Rookery Bay, Audubon, the Western Everglades, Audubon, Florida, Team Ocean, I'm going to spend some time with them, and Florida International University, and so many others, Collier County, City of Naples, all these other folks get together in one combined mission to manage these areas for birds. And every year after we post, I was going through my pictures, and I have about 5 of these different pictures. And this is just an example of what it's like with these partnerships. Here we have an FWC law enforcement officer there on the left. She was actually helping us put signs in. She was phenomenal. Big guy in the middle is me. To my left, your right, that's Ann Morrow. She was our former avian biologist. She's an FIU employee. And of course, there's Michelle Van Deventer. She's the CWA coordinator. And she is down here absolutely every single year, blood, sweat, and tears, helping us close these areas. So it's a real partnership effort. And the critical part here is that it says closed to public access. The critical wildlife area actually imposes not just, hey, please don't go here, but you can't go here because they'll be trespassing if you actually land on these areas during nesting season. Whoops, we lost everything there. That's interesting. Can you get me back there, Sarah? It's 2020, technical difficulties. So while we're talking there, what I want to talk about is with FWC, with it being a closed area and for trespass, FWC law enforcement is very critical to how we can actually manage these areas. So FWC law enforcement is out there on a very regular basis patrolling these areas. And that patrol is really important because first of all, they're showing a presence, they're showing the flag so that we don't have issues with people landing on there during nesting season. We still have a little bit of lag here. And that is really critical because what we don't want is a situation where this is going to become sort of the Wild West. We have other areas in the reserve where there's absolutely high public use and there's lots of folks out there on a regular basis. There's Gene again. You can see the technology issues in 2020. Nothing's easy, right? Slide keeps ending. So
I'll go directly to your slide. Oh my goodness, boy, we've got a lot going on here.
So what I really want to talk about, I've got about 5 minutes left, is this area is really about sharing the shoreline with birds. This is an area that is only actually closed during the summer months and while there are active birds on their nests. So during the wintertime, folks are doing eco tours, are able to go out on this area, enjoy these areas and recreate. And so it's very critical. We have other areas in the reserve, such as Key Wade Island, which is really important to the public. Those are public lands, so people can go out there, they can still have a good time. But importantly, we still have the ability to close down certain areas out there just in case we do have nesting birds on a regular basis. But probably the biggest, most important part of this story, and I hope we can bring it up in time, is Team Ocean. And Team Ocean, there's Key Wade. Yep, that's what it looks like during the Great Dock Canoe Race. So this, obviously, this is a benefit to the public. There's a lot of money which goes into spending out there and going time out there, but this is obviously not an ideal situation for nesting birds. So having the ability to close these areas and having folks like Team Ocean go out there on a regular basis is very important. This is Don Drake. Don Drake was an absolute leader in Team Ocean. Tragically, he passed away this year, but he was so involved, so dedicated, so passionate to protect these birds. And he's not the only one. Team Ocean, Ocean Conservation Education Action Network, spends a lot of time on the water. These are citizens out there on their own time in Rookery Bay boats. They don't have a DEP logo. They're just citizen talking to citizen. So it's really interpretive education when they're out there on the water. You can see that since 2015, they have spent the equivalent of 1,400 work days volunteering for Rookery Bay. And since 2015, Team Ocean has spent over 5,000 hours, 634 work days, just at Second Chance. And that is everything from helping us monitor, to helping post signage, to actually spinning around the island, making sure that nobody has any ideas about sneaking in there to go up on the beach, which happens on a regular basis. Team Ocean was so important in helping this place move forward that in 2017, led by Jason Hortum, who's a Rookery Bay employee, they actually received the Guy Bradley Award for Bird Conservation. You cannot understate the efforts of the leadership of Jason and the efforts of folks in Team Ocean and how hard they have worked to really conserve and save this place. This place is a very important place, not only just for Collier County, but for the entire state of Florida, because birds like least terns are really imperiled. This is fresh data from this year. Thank you, Cole. 150 pairs nesting out there, so we have at least 300 birds, and we already have 110 fledges and counting. So hopefully we can get even more birds out of there. This year, it's a really successful place because these birds have so little disturbance from people due to the closure. Black skimmers, another really imperiled species. So far, we know we have at least 200 birds. These birds are a little bit more tricky to monitor because they nest in denser vegetation than least terns. They also nest later in the season for a longer duration, which can put them more at risk of tropical cyclones. 13 fledged so far, which is right on cue. So you can see, thank you, Gene Hall, because let me tell you, nothing sells like cute and fuzzy. So I think that's really critical. And of course, none of us would be here protecting these places without the folks. So many people who spent their time, sweat, effort, and passion to protect Second Chance. Brad mentioned Ted Below. I want to mention him again. Because of folks like Ted Below, Second Chance really has a forever chance to continue protecting birds for Collier County and the entire state of Florida. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Keith. I don't know who has control over the PowerPoints, but I did have a question about where Second Chance is located. Sarah, I don't know if you could pull that map back up from the beginning of Adam's presentation while we're doing some of the Q&A maybe.
It will take me just a moment.
All right, so great presentations, different perspectives about Second Chance and the different efforts that have come together to help protect that special place and the birds that call that place home and raise their young there. So we have lots of time left over today for your questions, which is great. That's one of the cool things about a webinar versus just reading a paper or watching a video, is that you get to interact live with the presenters. So I'm gonna, I see there's some questions in, which is great. I'm gonna remind you guys that you can go in there and you can view the questions. You can hit the little thumbs up next to them to upvote and tell us which questions you want to hear us discuss during our remaining time. And if you've thought of any more questions throughout the webinar, go ahead and submit those and put some new questions in as well. So
Okay, yes, I've got the slide coming up.
All right, great. I'm going to kind of be moderating the panel, but before we get to the first question, I just wanted to give people an idea of where it is in case they missed that. I know we have some folks that are even from outside Florida today. We have over 80 people that are with us. So this is south of Cape Romano. We are in Southwest Florida. So if you look at the big peninsula of Florida, kind of almost all the way down at the bottom before it starts to make that curve around, we're on the western part of the peninsula. And this is out in the 10,000 Islands, which butts right up with the Everglades National Park boundary. So that kind of gives you an idea of where this tiny little blip of sand is that we are talking about today. All right, Sarah, if you want to stop screen sharing, I would encourage you guys that are watching on the top right, you've got the option for a gallery or a speaker view. If you do the gallery view, you'll be able to see us all. So I will go ahead and start looking in the Q&A for some questions for our panelists to answer. So the question with the most upvotes right now, I think I will start with asking Brad to address this one, and we'll see if anybody else has any to add in. So Marcy would like to know, and I think you touched on this a little bit, Brad, but maybe you can expand. How are these lessons and successes being applied or adapted elsewhere in the state where nesting birds are found?
So the entire state, you know, Florida has something like 1,300 or 1,400 miles of coastline. Not all of it is coastal habitat for nesting or resting shorebirds and seabirds, but a lot is. And unfortunately, you know, the issue is that our development, our human communities, and our recreation tends to be focused on the coast too. So like in the Panhandle, there are less populated areas. And so those lessons have told us, you know, you look at what the issues are in the area that you're talking about. So in Miami, you have lots of people. In the Panhandle, you have coyotes and raccoons. So those are two different management strategies, predators versus humans. And so in places where there are a lot of people, the lesson that we learn from critical wildlife areas is that we need the help of monitoring agencies like Rookery Bay and Audubon and law enforcement with FWC to make sure that everybody is, one, understanding what's at stake and understanding what's going on there. Because people show up at the beach, they just want to get a sunburn or go fishing. They don't know that there are little birds actually hatching out of eggs and growing up right on the beach. Because, you know, a nest on a beach, you don't know. Beach nesting birds are pretty cryptic. So it's an education process, and then it's a law enforcement process for few folks that need to be reminded twice. So
And
that's the lesson.
And I also want to add a little bit to that. So Second Chance is a place where it is closed down and there's potential for trespass for people actually stepping onto that area. We are currently working on some experiments in Tampa Bay Aquatic Reserves and Estero Bay Aquatic Reserves, where we're going to put informational buoys and signage around wading bird colonies to tell people, hey, let's stay this distance away to give these birds a chance. So there we're looking at more of an educational approach as to strictly enforcement and education. So hopefully with time, and we'll be trying to document if people actually will respect those. So hopefully it'll give us another tool in our toolbox.
And that's where Team Ocean also, by the way, in terms of lessons learned, you practically have to be out there 24 hours, not 24 hours, whenever it's light out. And sometimes even at night, because there's camping that goes on with campfires. I mean, look at the south end of Key Waden and you can see what can happen. So you need to have somebody there to remind you. It's like having a stop sign, and then every once in a while the sheriff has to show up with a radar gun. Otherwise people start ignoring things or speed limits. So Team Ocean is the reminder that we all need.
Yeah, and I think you guys are talking about kind of law enforcement and education and some of these other activities besides just the designation that help protect these areas, which is kind of getting at the next question that I'm going to bring up from Vicky, who's asking, she's asking, do these CWAs constantly need to be defended? Which I think you guys are answering is, yeah, there has to be law enforcement, there has to be education, there has to be this constant kind of presence and reminder, and of course, the ability to enforce if that's needed. But the first part of the question, Adam, I'm hoping maybe you know this answer. If not, we can go back to Brad, but she wants to know, how long does the CWA designation last? Does it need to be renewed or is it good forever?
I don't believe that it needs to be renewed. I think that if for some reason the island would shift out of that box from that map, which is the designated area, but the closure is only the emergent sandbar. And I think what I recall is that with the movement that we've seen, that's like 100 years worth of movement predicted. It would still stay within that box. So as long as there's emergent shoals inside that designated area, FWC and Rookery Bay and Audubon would be allowed to close it down as a CWA following the CWA order. So any emergent shoal in that designated area with nesting birds can be closed down from March 1st to August 31st every season.
And I'll just add on the length of time, I will note that in Rookery Bay, the Rookery Bay itself, there's actually a bay called Rookery Bay, which is owned by Audubon. There are a number of mangrove islands, Rookery Islands, that the birds have used, and they've used different ones at different times. And as they moved around, we realized we needed to change the designation so that it encompassed all the islands and it could be shifted from one to the other. So, which answers the question, if the birds or the wildlife stop using a critical wildlife area, it can be undesignated. And it does, there have been several that have been undesignated over the years. So you have to keep seeing wildlife using it or else it gets undesignated.
Yeah, and having that flexibility like Adam was talking about, have kind of this general area and then you designate within is key because the birds don't stay right where you tell them to, right?
That's right.
All right, so next question, I'm thinking maybe Keith knows the answer to this, maybe not, that's okay. From Nancy, we have, what is the fine or penalty if you trespass on Second Chance? Do you have an idea of that? Or maybe, if not,
yeah, so it's trespass. So if you have it can be a misdemeanor offense. I mean, it's criminal. And it's, especially, I think the officers have a lot of latitude. If people genuinely go out there and they don't see a sign, the officer may, just give them a warning. But if they're out there and people are obstinate, they want to be out there despite the signage, it can end up being a misdemeanor and it can be unfortunately on your criminal record, just because you have chosen to go out there on this one little sliver of beach where there's hundreds of, acres of other areas to go. So yeah, the rule does have teeth, which is really important.
And I would just add to that, that if you were out there trespassing and you happen to cause take of a Florida threatened species, whether it be a least-turned chick or eggs, and you stepped on them, that would add another layer to it because you'd be causing the mortality of a state threatened species. And then everything would just increase from there.
And take would be at killing one of the birds,
Right.
right?
And with a state threatened species, even if you're disturbing its normal behavior, so if it was sitting on a nest and you caused it to fly off, that's take as well. So anything that alters its natural breeding cycle or behavior.
Great. All right. Thanks. So a little bit of information about what the consequences can be if people do choose to ignore all the signs in education. So this is a little bit of a different direction, and I think Brad addressed a little bit of this in his presentation, so I'll ask him to address it first. From Marcy, she'd like to know about when the CWA was being established, was there any feedback from the fishing communities? So were they part of the planning, and was there any conflict with those users that maybe didn't want a CWA established?
So that's a really good question. And one of the slides that I showed emphasized this point that in the public hearing process, remember there were 2 public hearings for Second Chance, and that's true for all the next year, all the 13 new ones that Jean went around the state and photographed. There was a very concerted stakeholder engagement process, and fishermen are part of that stakeholder community. Recreationists, shellers, eco-tour operators. In the case of Second Chance, it wasn't the fishermen that were as interested, although we did reach out to them. It was the eco-tour operators, the boats that would bring shellers by the dozens to Second Chance because it had gained a reputation. And you saw one of those pictures, I think that Adam showed, with a lot of boats all, pulled up on the shores of Second Chance. And so they were engaged in the process. They did not object. I'm sure that they would have liked to have had access all year round, but I think everybody understood the value of the summer nesting habitat. And so we did not get a lot of pushback. That's not true in some of the other places. In Estero Bay, for instance, there were 3 new proposals. And I went to several of those hearings to support those. The fishing community pushed back very hard on those. Also in Pine Island Sound, there was a lot of pushback from the fishing community. So there's a lot of negotiation about, buffers and buffer distances. And the big issue there, just so people know, when fishermen get too close to a mangrove island where you've got pelicans or wading birds, great egrets, whatever, think of the ABC Islands over, off the Jolly Bridge. That's a CWA. That those can end up getting a lot of fishing line and hooks tangled in the mangrove branches because fishermen have gotten too close, and then they get hung up there and they cut the line, and now that becomes a really lethal hazard for these birds. And everybody has unfortunately seen the pretty grisly sight of a bird that is hanging upside down from a mangrove branch dead after having starved or from exposure, or it's a horrible way to die. So that's the reason for the setback, but it's also the reason the fishermen said, hey, that's one of my best fishing spots. So we have to work out, the understanding with that community, and that's what happened.
And I would add that the best way to combat that pushback, especially a pushback I think that doesn't hold much water, where you're just saying you like fishing there, is to have this long-term, robust data set, which is what FSA partners are collecting. So if somebody says, well, they don't believe you, it doesn't look like there's less birds, you don't just tell them, you show them, and you use really solid data collected by professionals in the field. We're doing that every day now. Beverly Anderson did it beforehand. And because all of that happened in all of these different places, FWC and Audubon and so many, Rookery Bay and so many other organizations, we had data to back up what we were saying, and it helped sway that argument. And it was a unanimous decision to create all these CWAs. So it wasn't close, or it wasn't like we didn't just win by a vote. The whole commission, they were unanimously supported it because we had very solid data backing it up.
Yeah, it's a good point. A very key piece of this story is kind of that beginning of all the data that Bev did and so carefully collected. Adam, on that data, we did have a question from Michelle about the number of nests for lease turns that you showed at the beginning. Was that nest counts? Did it include the renest?
So yeah, I saw that question. Hello, Michelle. Thank you for watching. But I should have clarified that in that graph. So that's a number of nesting pairs, not number of nests necessarily, because if a bird fledges a chick on the first nest or the third, it doesn't affect the productivity number. It's still, that chick has been produced. So it should have been clearer, and it should have said nesting pairs instead of nests.
Okay. All right, thanks. All right, so let's think about something a little bit different here. We've been talking a lot about people disturbing. We have an interesting question from Tom that I'm going to have Keith address first. Tom's asking, how fragile is second chance to hurricanes? If it is submerged or it has been in the past, is that likely that it will happen again?
Yeah, so that's a really interesting question. And of course, hurricanes are driving forces for pretty much everything in the Southeast. So if we were to have a storm right now, obviously we're going to have loss of the colony, we're going to have loss of least terns, we're going to have loss of black skimmers. However, there is another side of hurricanes, which is actually really important to these nesting species. Species like snowy plovers and least terns in particular do not like a lot of beach vegetation. They like flat open areas where they can see lots of predators coming their way. Everything from rats to crows to ghost crabs. And so if you had an area that has not had an overwash in a long time, you're going to have a lot of vegetation growing. This vegetation can actually reduce nesting habitat for these species. And they found in the Florida Panhandle, the big hurricane years of 04 to 06, they had low productivity those years because everything got washed out. Afterwards, however, the numbers went up dramatically, lots of nesting success. Over time, vegetation got thick enough, however, where the nesting success went down. So it is a trade-off, because you do need a hurricane, because these are disturbed areas by nature. They are emergent shoals, which are getting a lot of wave action. So if we don't get a storm or something that doesn't overwash second chance from time to time, it's actually going to reduce the amount of really solid habitat for these birds to nest. So it'd be bad for them temporarily. Long-term, occasionally you want some kind of overwash. You know, us in the conservation business, we hope it's in the wintertime, not necessarily in the summertime, because we don't want to lose those birds.
And Keith, a follow-up to that from Veronica about managing those plants. Does Rookery Bay actively manage the vegetation growth around the CWA?
We've gone out there and attempted it a couple times, and usually after we're going to take a swing at it, a hurricane came right in after us. I remember we were about to do it in 2017. Hurricane Irma came along and took care of that for us. But there are some programs where I believe we can work with DEP and FWC. If the vegetation were to get too thick, we can do some selective removal and even a prescribed burn to get some of that vegetation out of there to improve that habitat.
Great, thanks. Might seem counterintuitive to people that don't think about management. Like, plants are good, right? Well, not for everything in every case. Let's see, the next question that I've got, and this was one that I had never really thought about. Maybe Brad will know. If Joel is asking, is there a minimum size area requirement for a CWA?
Yeah, that's a really good question. If Michelle Vantemeter is on the open up her mic and maybe she can tell me, but tell us. I think it's they're not necessarily super big. Obviously, a mangrove island can be really important and not be that large. The problem with the CWAs, as Adam and Keith both pointed out, is that especially with sandbars that are out in the Gulf or barrier islands, they shift and move around. And so the designation has to be big enough to allow for the shifting and moving. And that's probably more of a factor. Where the birds go may be a small spot of that, but it may not be the same place every year. And Sand Dollar Island, Big Marco Pass Critical Wildlife Area on Marco is a good example of it. The birds move up and down that huge 2.5 mile long beach.
Okay, thanks. And I think I'm just going to do one last question. Where did that one? Oh, they're all like being rearranged. There was a question that I wanted to give Adam a chance to speak to. It was about how are the shorebirds protected on Keewaydin during the Great Canoe Race?
So currently this season, we didn't have we had one nesting pair of Wilson's plovers on the south end of Keewaydin, and that nest was taken probably by a predator. One of the troubles, it's not only people trouble we have. Keewaydin is such a giant island, and it's forested, and it has all the things that you would have on the mainland: coyotes and raccoons and iguanas, hogs, all sorts of natural threats to the seabirds, along with the people. So if there is nesting out there, because it doesn't have a CWA designation, we do post the nesting areas, and the birds that have nests are protected within those areas. But we can't really do crowd control or of any kind there during that time. There is FWC law enforcement out there, and if people entered closed areas and they were seen, they would be dealt with for going inside of a posted area. But it kind of just highlights, even though with our best efforts, like at Second Chance before it was a CWA, sometimes we can't do enough for the birds. And I would say that because Keewaydin is able to be accessed by the public, which does have its benefits, it keeps those crowds at Keewaydin where we don't have a lot of nesting. It keeps them off of Marco, which is adjacent to Keewaydin, and we have lots of nesting. It maybe reduces the traffic on the other delicate shorelines of the Cape Romano complex, like Morgan Beach, Cape Romano, Second Chance, where we have turtles and birds nesting. So as much as some of the people on this webinar are horrified by the sight of all of those people there, it is really important, I think, to have a place that people can go, because everybody doesn't want a beach to be empty. Some people like doing that. I'm not one of those people. They're out there, and we need to provide them with places to recreate where it's safe for birds. And it turns out that the south end of Keewaydin at the current time is a good place for them to do that. And it keeps the traffic down on these other very sensitive places that we have increased protection at. So I think at the end of the day, it's good to concentrate people at Keewaydin.
Kind of balancing out the human needs and the needs of the wildlife.
Yep.
Great. I think that's a nice kind of, final thought for the webinar. We are almost at 2 o'clock, so I'm going to go ahead and wrap up. If you guys would like to hang around afterwards, we will hang around for a couple of minutes to address some questions we didn't have time to get to. I'm going to go ahead and put in the chat now a link to an evaluation for the webinar. If you guys have time, please fill that out. That helps us to continue to improve these programs for the future, and also helps for our reporting. You are going to get a follow-up email from the Friends of Rookery Bay. That is the nonprofit arm that really helps support all of the activities that we do to protect the wildlife, the natural areas, and work with all the people that live around them. So look out for that email. It'll have the link to the evaluation as well, in case you don't have time now. It's also going to tell you how you can help support the Friends, which ultimately helps us at Rookery Bay through either volunteering with an organization like Team Ocean, or becoming a member, or even donating to help out. So look for that email. And then kind of the final thing that we want to tell you about is this is not the only online opportunity for you guys. This is part of a series that we're doing through October. So this was the 3rd webinar. Our next webinar on September 8th is going to be about getting the water right, which was a science collaborative that we did a few years back to look at the watershed around Rookery Bay, and really looking at how the water is flowing and how much water is needed to keep all the plants and animals, the environment here, healthy. So it's going to be an interesting look at that project, which had a lot of similar components of looking at people's needs and the plants and animals' needs. So I'm going to put a link into the chat so you guys can sign up for that as well, and learn about another way that Rookery Bay worked with lots of great partners, just like we heard about today, but just a slightly different topic, with the goal of really protecting the special place in Southwest Florida and the people and plants and animals that depend on it. So thank you for being here. Thank you to our panelists for having a great discussion and sharing a lot of really great information with us. And if you guys need to run because it's 2 o'clock, we thank you for being here. If you want to hang on for a few minutes and ask some more questions, I think most of the panelists are going to be able to hang around for a couple of minutes.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you so much. We'll see you next time.
And I know Keith had to run because he has a meeting that was starting at 2. And disclaimer, this is the first time we're trying to do the let's hang around afterwards and answer some questions because we feel bad we run out of time, but people still have questions they wanted answered. So I think what we'll try is, I see somebody has their hand raised. We'll just use that function. If I can pull up the participant list to see Gloria has her hand raised. So I can allow her to, I think, allow her to talk. And then Gloria, you'll be able to ask your question of the panelist. And Sarah, maybe we want to stop recording.